Did you know that the average lifespan of an empire is just 250 years? That's about 10 generations. This pattern has held true for over 3,000 years of human history. Now, consider this. The United States is 247 years old. Coincidence? Maybe. But in the next few minutes, you'll learn why this number matters and what it means for our future. History's about to get personal. The 250-year empire life cycle isn't just a random number. It comes from the research of John Glubb, a British soldier and historian who studied the rise and fall of empires from ancient Assyria to the British Empire. Glubb noticed a predictable pattern. Empires start with a burst of energy, expand rapidly, reach their peak, and then slowly decline. This whole process usually takes about 250 years, shorter than the United States has already been around. Of course, history is messy, and not every empire fits neatly into this pattern. Some lasted longer, some shorter. The Roman Empire, for example, stuck around for centuries longer than Glubb's theory would predict. But even with these outliers, the pattern holds up surprisingly well across many different empires and time periods. Not everyone's convinced by this theory, though. Some historians argue that it oversimplifies things, pointing out that each empire faced unique challenges and circumstances. Can we really lump them all together in one neat pattern? It's a fair criticism. History isn't a science experiment where we can control all the variables. And yet, the pattern persists. It's like there's something about human nature or the nature of power itself that follows this rhythm. So what does that mean for us today? If you're living in a global superpower, it might make you a bit nervous. Are we approaching the end of our cycle? Are we already past it? But here's where it gets interesting. Just because we can see a pattern doesn't mean we're doomed to repeat it. Understanding this cycle might actually be the key to breaking it. If we can recognize the signs of imperial decline, maybe we can take steps to avoid them. As we dive into each stage of this imperial life cycle, remember, we're not just learning about the past, we're potentially glimpsing our future, and maybe, just maybe, finding a way to change it. So what exactly happens during each stage of an empire's life? Let's find out. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast empire, armed with nothing but courage and ambition. How could you possibly challenge such established power? The answer lies in understanding the unique mindset of history's most successful pioneers. Picture this, a small, hungry tribe living on the fringes of a mighty civilization. They have no wealth, no advanced technology, and no powerful allies. But they possess a burning desire for something better. This relentless drive sets them apart from the complacent masses within the empire's borders. Now you might be wondering, how could such a ragtag group ever hope to stand against an established power? It seems impossible, right? But history tells us a different story. Time and time again, small groups of determined individuals have risen up and changed the world. Take the Mongols, for example. Before Genghis Khan united them, they were just scattered tribes, barely surviving on the harsh steppes. But under his leadership, they built an empire that stretched from China to Europe. Their success stemmed from a potent mix of ambition and adaptability. Or consider the early Arab conquests in the 7th century. Desert dwellers suddenly exploded out of the Arabian Peninsula, conquering vast territories. Their rapid expansion was fueled by a combination of religious zeal and the promise of new opportunities. So what's the secret here? What transforms these underdogs into world changers? John Glubb, in his study of empires, calls this the Age of Pioneers. It's a time when a society is lean, hungry, and united by a common purpose. They're not weighed down by bureaucracy or softened by luxury. Instead, they're driven by a powerful mix of ambition, necessity, and shared vision. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Isn't this just about greed and violence? And you'd have a point. The rise of empires often comes with a hefty price tag in human suffering, but it's not always so simple. Sometimes these pioneers are driven by genuine idealism. They might believe they're spreading a superior way of life or a liberating ideology. Whatever their motivations, one thing is clear. This hunger for glory fuels rapid expansion. These small groups, once they start gaining momentum, can grow at an astonishing rate. They adapt quickly, absorbing and repurposing the technologies and organizational structures of the civilizations they encounter. But here's the kicker, and this is crucial to understanding the whole empire life cycle. Glory isn't enough to sustain an empire. That initial burst of energy and expansion is just the first stage. Once the pioneers have conquered and built, they face a whole new set of challenges. And that's where things start to get really complicated. What happens when you've conquered half the known world? Victory brings its own set of problems. Welcome to the conqueror's dilemma, where success on the battlefield leads to headaches in the throne room. So you've built this massive empire. Your name strikes fear into your enemies, and your coffers overflow with gold. But now you're facing a whole new challenge. How do you actually run this thing? The first big question is, do you keep expanding or focus on what you've already got? It's tempting to keep pushing those borders outward. After all, that's what got you here. But at some point, you got to stop and figure out how to govern all this territory. It's like trying to manage a rapidly growing business without any prior experience. Now here's where things get really interesting. Successful empires don't just conquer people, they absorb them. The Arabs, for example, incorporated elements of Greek and Persian culture into their own when they built their empire. This cultural fusion created a new civilization that was more sustainable and adaptable. But it's not all smooth sailing. Trying to manage a diverse empire is like herding cats. If the cats all spoke different languages and had wildly different customs, you've got to find a way to keep everyone happy, or at least not actively rebellious, while still maintaining control. It's a balancing act that plenty of empires have struggled with. So what happens when the thrill of conquest starts to fade? Well, that's when things really start to change. All those warriors who were great at swinging swords, they start to realize there's more to life than battle. And more importantly, there's more to power than just military might. This is where we see a big shift in focus. Instead of expanding the empire's borders, rulers start thinking about expanding its wealth. Trade becomes the new battlefield. It's less bloody, but no less competitive. This shift changes the whole character of the empire. Remember those tough, glory-seeking pioneers who started it all. Their grandkids are more interested in profit margins than military campaigns. The focus moves from honor and bravery to cold, hard cash. It's like the empire grows up and gets a real job. But don't think this means things get boring. Oh no, because as money becomes the new measure of imperial success, we're about to enter a whole new phase of the empire's life cycle. And let me tell you, things are about to get very interesting indeed. Money can't buy happiness, and it might not sustain an empire either. As we enter the age of trade and commerce, we're about to see a transformation that would shock even the toughest conqueror. Imagine an empire so big that roads stretch across continents and ships sail oceans, linking the farthest parts of the world. It's a merchant's paradise. With peace guaranteed by military strength, trade booms like never before. Exotic goods from distant lands fill the markets. Wealth pours in from everywhere. It's prosperity on a scale that would make anyone envious. But here's the twist. All this commerce is changing society itself. The old values of duty, honor, and sacrifice that built the empire, they're starting to look outdated. Why risk your life in battle when you can get rich in the marketplace? Now, this golden age of trade has some great benefits. Cities grow bigger and fancier. art and culture thrive. Life gets a lot more comfortable for many people, but there's a downside. As the ruling class gets richer, they lose touch with everyone else. They're not leading armies or building infrastructure anymore. They're just focused on making more money and living it up. This focus on personal gain spreads through society. People start caring more about their own wealth and status than the good of the empire. Materialism and individualism become the new normal. It's like the whole empire is going soft, losing its edge. As wealth flows in, something else happens. People start questioning whether all that conquest was really necessary. Maybe it was even wrong. Pacifism looks pretty good when you're living in luxury. The old tales of glorious battles start to sound kind of brutal. You might think, what's wrong with peace and prosperity? Fair point. But here's the thing. Empires aren't built on comfort. They're built on that hunger we talked about earlier, that drive to achieve greatness, to push boundaries, to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. As gold pours in, something vital slips away. The empire might look stronger and richer than ever, but underneath it's weakening. That sense of shared purpose, the willingness to put the empire first, it's fading, replaced by a culture of self-interest. So what's next for our prosperous empire? Well, when you've got everything you could ever want, life can get complicated, and not always in a good way. Let's see how this plays out. You'd think having it all would be the ultimate goal, right? But what if reaching the pinnacle of prosperity could actually spell doom for an empire? Let's explore how abundance can lead to decay, where comfort undermines strength and wealth whispers warnings of collapse. Picture a society at its peak. Palaces gleam, markets overflow with exotic goods, and technology makes life easier than ever. Sounds amazing, doesn't it? But there's a hidden cost to all this luxury, and it goes beyond gold. As societies reach extreme affluence, something strange happens. People lose their edge. The drive that built the empire in the first place starts to fade. When you never worry about survival, what's left to strive for? That's the problem our hypothetical empire faces. Its citizens have forgotten how to struggle. Psychology tells us that extreme wealth can seriously mess with people's heads. Studies show the ultra-rich often become more self-centered, less empathetic, and prone to risky behavior. It's like their moral compass goes haywire in a world of endless abundance. This complacency infects every level of society. The government bloats and loses efficiency. The military, once the empire's backbone, grows soft. Why train hard when there are no real threats? And the average citizen? They care more about entertainment than civic duty. As physical needs are met and surpassed, people turn to intellectual pursuits. Philosophy, science, and art flourish in this environment of leisure. It looks like a golden age of culture and learning, but there's a dark side to this intellectual boom. The educated elite lose touch with reality. They debate lofty ideas while ignoring growing problems at the empire's foundation. It's a dangerous disconnect that sets the stage for major upheaval. So what happens to a society that forgets how to struggle? As we're about to see, when a civilization reaches this level of comfort, it becomes vulnerable in ways its citizens can't even imagine. And that vulnerability, it's about to be exploited in ways that will shock you. Picture a society where every physical need is met, where luxury is the norm. What's left to conquer? The final frontier becomes the human mind. But this intellectual explosion might be the empire's last gasp. In the twilight years of great empires, something fascinating happens. With bellies full and borders secure, people turn their attention to loftier pursuits. It's about unraveling the mysteries of the universe, creating breathtaking art, and pondering the nature of existence itself. This explosion of intellectual and artistic activity is truly remarkable. We're talking about a golden age of culture and learning. Philosophy flourishes, science makes leaps and bounds, and the arts reach new heights of sophistication. The whole empire becomes a giant think tank, buzzing with big ideas and groundbreaking discoveries. But here's where things get tricky. Can all this brain power actually solve society's problems? Or is it just a fancy distraction from deeper issues? The sad truth is, while the elites are debating the meaning of life in marble halls, the average person on the street might be struggling to make ends meet. This disconnect between the intellectual class and the masses is a big problem. The smartest minds in the empire lose touch with reality, so caught up in their abstract theories that they forget about the world around them. Now, don't get me wrong, this period produces some amazing advancements. We're talking about breakthroughs in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, you name it. But here's the kicker. All this progress often happens in a bubble, separated from the everyday concerns of ordinary people. What are these great minds overlooking? Well, for starters, they might be missing the signs of decay in their own society. They're so busy looking at the stars that they don't notice the cracks forming in the foundation of their empire. Economic inequality, social unrest, corruption in government, these problems fester while the intellectuals argue about abstract concepts. It's like the empire is throwing a grand party for its smartest citizens, complete with fancy debates and artistic performances. Meanwhile, outside the party, things are starting to fall apart. The intellectual pursuits become a kind of mask, hiding the growing divisions in society. Think about it this way. When you're caught up in endless discussions about the nature of reality, it's easy to ignore the very real problems happening right under your nose. These thinkers genuinely believe they're making the world better through their work. But their focus on ideas over practical solutions can have unintended consequences. As we wrap up this section, consider this. While the great minds of the empire are locked in heated debates, something is rotting at its core. The very pursuits that make this period seem so glorious might actually be accelerating the empire's decline. It's a painful irony. The more an empire invests in intellectual growth, the more it might be neglecting its own survival. So what happens next? Well, as these thinkers continue their lofty discussions, the cracks in the empire's foundation are about to become impossible to ignore. And that's when things start to get really interesting. You know that feeling when you're on top of the world and nothing can bring you down? Now imagine that for an entire civilization. Sounds amazing, right? But this sense of invincibility might actually be the thing that dooms an empire. Let's look at the psychology of power and how it can make even the mightiest nations blind to their own weaknesses. When an empire is at its peak, there's this intoxicating feeling of being untouchable. You've beaten all your enemies, you're swimming in wealth, and everyone wants to be like you. It's like being on a mountain peak, looking down at the world below. The view is incredible, but it's hard to see what's happening right under your feet. While emperors are busy admiring themselves, little signs of decay start to appear. Maybe there's more corruption in the government than usual, or the gap between rich and poor is growing. These might seem small at first, but they're like cracks in a foundation. Small but dangerous. History is full of empires that thought they'd last forever. Rome is a perfect example. At its height, Romans truly believed their empire would never end. They even had a saying, Roma Eterna, eternal Rome. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. By the time they realized they were in trouble, it was too late. How do smart, powerful people miss these warning signs? Well, our brains do some weird things when we're in charge. Psychologists call it group overconfidence. When successful people get together, they start to think they can't fail. It's like they're all wearing rose-colored glasses. But it gets even stranger. There's something called willful blindness, where people actually ignore information that might challenge their view of the world. It's not that they can't see the problems, they choose not to. They're so convinced of their own success that they refuse to acknowledge anything that might threaten it. So what kind of threats are these overconfident empires missing? While they're busy congratulating themselves, all sorts of dangers could be building up. Maybe a new rival power is rising, or the common people are getting restless, or economic problems are about to explode. The scary part is, by the time these threats become obvious, it might be too late to do anything about them. That false sense of security prevents empires from adapting, from fixing problems before they become disasters. As we wrap up this section, think about this. Every empire in history thought it was special, that it would be the one to last forever. But as we're about to see, that confidence often turns out to be misplaced, because while the empire is celebrating its own greatness, the cracks in its foundation are getting bigger and bigger. Remember those cracks we mentioned? They're more than just surface-level issues. Corruption and decay can eat away at the very foundations of an empire, slowly but surely undermining its strength. It starts small, almost imperceptibly. A minor official skims a little off the top. A wealthy merchant bribes his way out of paying taxes. A general promotes his incompetent nephew. Each act seems insignificant on its own, but together they form the beginnings of a cancer that can bring down even the mightiest empire. How can such small things undermine something so vast and powerful? Well, it's all about momentum. Once corruption takes hold, it tends to spread. Soon, what started as a few isolated incidents becomes a pervasive culture of corruption. Think about it this way: when people see others getting ahead through dishonest means, they start to feel like chumps for playing by the rules. So they join in. Before you know it, corruption isn't just common, it's expected. It becomes the way things are done. Now, you might be wondering about the psychology behind all this. Why do people in successful societies start to behave this way? Part of it is simple human nature. When resources are plentiful and oversight is lax, the temptation to cheat the system becomes hard to resist. But there's more to it than that. As societies become more complex and bureaucratic, it gets easier for corruption to hide in the shadows. There are more rules to bend, more loopholes to exploit. And as the gap between the elite and the common people grows, those at the top start to feel like the rules don't apply to them. We've seen this play out in empires throughout history. In the Roman Empire's later years, corruption was widespread. Positions of power were bought and sold openly. The wealthy dodged taxes while the poor were squeezed dry. Similarly, in the Ming dynasty of China, officials lined their pockets while neglecting their duties. The imperial court became a nest of intrigue and backstabbing. So what happens when this rot reaches the highest levels of power? That's when things get really scary. Leaders become more concerned with enriching themselves than with governing effectively. They surround themselves with yes-men and sycophants. Important decisions are made based on personal gain rather than the good of the empire. The result? The whole system starts to break down. The military weakens, the economy falters, infrastructure crumbles, and the people lose faith in their government. Empires don't usually fall because of a single catastrophic event. More often, they crumble slowly from within, weakened by the very abundance and success they worked so hard to achieve. This internal decay leaves them vulnerable to threats they might once have easily brushed aside. The empire is weakening from within, and new dangers are lurking just over the horizon. Picture an empire on the brink of collapse. As things start falling apart, a certain type of leader emerges, the demagogue. These aren't your average politicians. They're charismatic figures who rise to power by exploiting people's fears and frustrations. Why do people follow them? It's a mix of desperation and human psychology. When times are tough, we crave simple answers and someone to blame. Demagogues provide exactly that, even if their solutions don't make sense long term. Take the late Roman Republic. Leaders like Julius Caesar and Marius tapped into public discontent, promising land reforms and wealth redistribution. We see similar patterns in modern politics all the time. The ancient Greek historian Polybius described how democracies can turn into mob rule. He outlined a cycle where charismatic leaders manipulate public sentiment for personal gain. It's like emotional chess with an entire population. Psychological studies show how these leaders influence our emotions and perceptions. We get so caught up in their promises that we stop thinking critically, overlooking flaws and potential consequences. The relationship between populist leaders and societal instability is complex. They rally support during crises, offering hope. But they often worsen things long-term, exacerbating divisions and turning groups against each other. What happens when demagogues take charge? History shows empires tend to experience rapid decline. Internal conflicts become more pronounced, leading to swift collapse. It's like watching a house of cards tumble in slow motion. The rise of demagogues often signals an empire's final stages. They promise unity and strength, but actually accelerate decline. As the empire fractures from within, it becomes vulnerable to outside threats. The stage is set for the final act in our imperial drama. What comes next? Let's just say hungry eyes are watching from beyond the borders. While the empire struggles internally, threats loom beyond its borders. Other powers have been growing stronger, neighboring kingdoms building up militaries, nomadic tribes uniting under charismatic leaders. These external threats wait for the perfect moment to strike. Can a divided empire stand against united outsiders? History suggests not. The Byzantine Empire, caught up in civil wars and political infighting, fell to the Ottoman Turks who were preparing their attack. The Mongol invasions capitalized on disunity within Islamic empires, leading to rapid conquests. It's a pattern we see repeated throughout history. The real problem: empires often fail to recognize these existential threats until it's too late. They're so focused on internal issues that they can't see the bigger picture. Glubb's analysis points out how empires get distracted by political discourse and divisions, arguing about taxes or succession while danger masses at the borders. What's the final blow that brings a mighty empire to its knees? It's rarely just one thing. It's more like a perfect storm of internal weakness and external pressure. The empire's military might be weakened by corruption and lack of resources. Its people might be divided and demoralized. And then, when the moment is just right, the external threat strikes. Take the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Rome had dealt with Germanic tribes for centuries. What changed was Rome itself. As the empire weakened internally, those invasions became more than they could handle. External pressures exploit the empire's internal weaknesses. They find allies among disgruntled factions or target areas where control is already slipping. Once it starts, it's only a matter of time before the whole thing collapses. The fall is coming. That much is clear. But can anything be done to stop it? As we move into our next section, we'll explore whether an empire in decline can pull itself back from the brink, or if the forces of history are just too strong to resist. Things are about to get really interesting. Picture an empire in its final days, a once mighty lion now a shadow of itself. Crumbling palaces, quiet streets, and a disorganized army tell the tale of decline. But is this really the end? History shows empires don't just vanish overnight. The Roman Empire's fall took centuries, a slow-motion collapse that left a hollow shell by 476 AD. Living through an empire's fall is a psychological roller coaster. People cycle through disbelief, denial, anger, and finally acceptance. It's like grieving for an entire civilization. But as the old order crumbles, new possibilities emerge. When a big tree falls in the forest, it creates space for new growth. The same happens when empires fall. a power vacuum that new players rush to fill, and so the cycle begins anew. The conquerors who topple one empire often become founders of the next. Take the Mongols. They conquered half the known world, then settled down and founded new dynasties. The dance of civilizations continues. As we wrap up our journey through empire life cycles, let's look around. Which empires are thriving now? Which ones are declining? And where might the next great power be emerging? History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Understanding these patterns gives us a chance to prepare for what's coming. So next time you check the news, ask yourself, where are we in this grand cycle? Are we seeing new powers rise, old ones fall, or maybe something entirely new? The answers might surprise you. As we approach America's 249th birthday, some historians and political analysts are drawing parallels to John Glubb's theory of imperial life cycles. Glubb identified 250 years as the typical lifespan of great powers, and the United States is inching closer to that mark. Where does the US fit in this cycle? Some experts argue we're in the age of decadence. They point to growing inequality, political polarization, and a sense of cultural exhaustion. But are we really seeing signs of late-stage empire? Let's look at some current trends. There's a growing pessimism in American society. People are losing faith in institutions. The political system seems increasingly dysfunctional. These symptoms align with what Glubb described in empires nearing their end. Now you might be thinking, America still seems pretty powerful. And you'd be right. The US remains the world's largest economy with an unmatched military. But history shows that empires often appear strongest just before they fall. What might the near future hold if this pattern continues? Some analysts predict increasing civil strife and social fragmentation. They discuss demographic shifts that could alter the nation's character. But not everyone agrees with this pessimistic outlook. Some experts argue that America has a unique ability to reinvent itself. They point to past crises like the Civil War and the Great Depression, where the US faced existential threats and emerged stronger. So what's the takeaway? It's complicated. The US faces serious challenges, both internally and globally. But whether these will lead to decline or renewal is still debated. America isn't alone in this global power dynamic, though. There's another ancient empire making a comeback, and it's got everyone talking. But that's a story for our next section. China's rise on the world stage is challenging our understanding of empires and their typical lifespan. How is this ancient civilization defying the 250-year cycle that's marked the end for so many others? The answer might surprise you. And it has global implications that are hard to overstate. We're talking about a civilization with 5,000 years of history suddenly becoming a major player in global affairs. China's current ascent bears hallmarks of early empire building we discussed earlier. They're pouring resources into infrastructure, technology, and military development. But there's a key difference. They're doing it with a unique blend of ancient wisdom and modern innovation. This raises some intriguing questions. Is China starting a fresh 250-year cycle, or is it continuing a much longer historical trajectory? Their transition from isolation to economic powerhouse seems to contradict everything we've learned about empires. It's as if they've found a way to accelerate the process of global influence. But before we jump to conclusions, let's consider some potential hurdles. China faces serious demographic challenges, with an aging population and economic disparities that could slow their growth. Environmental issues also loom large. Their rapid progress comes with significant ecological costs that may soon demand attention. So will China become the next global superpower? That's the question on everyone's mind. Some experts point to China's rapid growth and strategic initiatives as evidence of their future dominance. Others caution that internal challenges and external pressures could derail their ascent. The outcome remains uncertain. Looking ahead, we might see a few different scenarios play out. China could continue its rise and become the dominant global power, or internal issues might slow them down, leading to a more balanced international system. There's even a chance that China's ascent could spur other nations to greater innovation and competition. One thing's certain, with giants like America and China in flux, the global order is in for significant changes. But what about the rest of the world? How are other powers reacting to this shifting landscape? That's another complex story altogether. As the world watches the struggle between America and China, Europe faces a pivotal moment. Once the center of global empires, it now grapples with a crucial question: unite or crumble? The answer could significantly alter the global balance of power. Europe's current situation is complex. The European Union represents an ambitious experiment, attempting to forge a new entity from diverse nations with rich histories. But can this vision succeed? The central dilemma is whether the EU can evolve into a cohesive force, or if it will fragment. It's a formidable economic bloc with substantial cultural and political influence. Yet it faces mounting challenges: rising nationalism, economic disparities, and diverging national interests. These challenges are testing the European project. Brexit's aftermath, migration tensions, and economic imbalances between member states create significant hurdles. The very concept of a European identity is under scrutiny as national allegiances reassert themselves. However, Europe isn't without unique strengths. It leads in renewable energy and social welfare policies. European culture and values continue to wield considerable soft power globally. Expert opinions on Europe's future are divided. Some argue that deeper integration is essential for Europe to compete with global powers like the US and China. Others contend that the differences between European countries are too vast to overcome. A key question emerges: what role will Europe play in the emerging global order? Will it be a major player, a mediator between other powers, or a bystander? The answer could have far-reaching implications for international dynamics. Several scenarios for Europe's future are possible. It might overcome internal divisions to emerge as a united force. Alternatively, a two-speed Europe could develop, with varying levels of integration among member states. There's also the possibility of fragmentation, leaving individual nations to navigate a world dominated by larger powers. Europe's journey is ongoing, and its outcome remains uncertain. As history has shown, geopolitical landscapes are ever-changing. What comes next for Europe is a question that continues to intrigue and puzzle observers worldwide. Europe's identity crisis is just one part of a larger global shift. The international landscape is changing dramatically, and the world order we've known for centuries might be transforming. What happens when there's no clear dominant power and multiple nations vie for influence? This is the concept of multipolarity, a world where power is distributed among multiple centers rather than concentrated in one or two superpowers. It's like transitioning from a simple hierarchy to a complex network where many actors have significant roles. But this new arrangement brings challenges. Without a clear global leader who sets and enforces international norms, the absence of a dominant power could lead to uncertainty and potential conflicts. What might this multipolar world look like? We could see the emergence of strong regional powers, countries that dominate their geographic areas. For instance, Brazil might become more influential in South America, while India could play a larger role in South Asia. Some experts suggest that countries might develop specialized influences. Perhaps Switzerland becomes a key player in resolving international cyber disputes, or Singapore sets global standards for urban development. This shift in global dynamics could have far-reaching effects on everyday life. International decisions made in distant capitals might impact your job prospects, the products available to you, and even global entertainment and cuisine. However, it's not all potential downsides. A more diverse power structure could foster new forms of international cooperation and innovative solutions to global challenges. We might see fresh approaches to addressing issues like climate change or economic inequality. What are some possible scenarios for the coming decades? We might see an expanded version of the current G7, with a larger group of nations collectively guiding global affairs. Alternatively, we could end up with a network of regional organizations, each focused on different issues. There's even the possibility of entirely new forms of international governance emerging. One thing is certain, the world in 2100 will likely look very different from today. But can we truly predict the future based on past patterns? History often takes unexpected turns, and the next major shift might be something we haven't even considered. The future is coming, and it promises to be full of surprises. We've seen empires rise and fall throughout history, but what if that pattern isn't set in stone? Some societies have managed to reinvent themselves when faced with decline. Can modern nations learn this trick and avoid the fate that's befallen so many great powers before them? It's a question that's kept historians and politicians up at night for centuries. Is decline truly inevitable once it begins, or can it be reversed? History gives us a few examples of empires that managed to pull themselves back from the brink. Japan, during the Meiji Restoration, transformed from an isolated feudal society to a modern industrial power in a short time. But can we apply these lessons to our modern world? Some experts think so. They argue that understanding the patterns of rise and fall is the first step to breaking the cycle. It's like knowing the common pitfalls in relationships. It doesn't guarantee success, but it sure can help. One strategy that keeps coming up is better wealth distribution. Glubb suggests that if a nation shares both burdens and benefits, it can foster a sense of unity and purpose. It's about creating a society where everyone feels they have a stake in the future. Glubb talks about the importance of a spirit of service and self-sacrifice. He argues that a society needs to prioritize values higher than money and individual gain to avoid the pitfalls of decadence and decline. Are we saying that the key to avoiding imperial collapse is being less selfish? Some experts propose the idea of national service as a way to instill this sense of duty and community. It could be all sorts of ways for citizens to contribute to society. The goal is to engage people in meaningful work that goes beyond just lining their own pockets. Changing an entire society's values is a tall order. What would it take for a society to truly learn from history and change course? Well, for starters, it might require a deep understanding of historical patterns. Glubb points out that empires often fail to learn from history, which leads to repeating the same mistakes. It's like watching someone step on the same rake over and over again. Painful, but also kind of funny, if it's not happening to you. As we wrap up, let's consider what all this means for our future. Can we create more sustainable forms of organization that don't follow the same old rise and fall pattern? Some experts think a mixed constitution, balancing power among different branches of government, might be the key. Others emphasize the importance of community engagement and practical skills to counteract the frivolity and materialism that often come with imperial decline. One thing's for sure, if we want to break the cycle, we've got our work cut out for us. Maybe understanding these patterns is the first step towards creating a future that doesn't repeat the mistakes of the past. Now that's something to think about. Understanding these cycles of power shapes our future. We're in a unique position, the first generation with access to all of human history at our fingertips. This knowledge gives us a chance to spot signs of decline and potentially change course. These patterns have played out for thousands of years, but that doesn't mean we're powerless. Human beings have faced big challenges before and come out on top. While these cycles might seem set in stone, we have the opportunity to rewrite the rules. Our society is at a crossroads. We can use our understanding of historical patterns to build something new or address decay before it's too late. It's a daunting task, but not an impossible one. The key is to use our knowledge wisely. By learning from the past and applying those lessons to the present, we can work towards a future that breaks free from the cycle of rise and fall. It's up to us to take action and shape the world we want to see.